So I want to take you back to my freshman year of high school, and it was the fall semester. I remember that very vividly because I know it was football season. And it was a normal weeknight, and I was getting ready for bed, but all of a sudden I start to feel a little discomfort, a little pain in my lower left back. It wasn't too abnormal at first. I've played football for a while and other sports, and I'm used to hurting, so I was like, that's probably nothing. But then probably a couple minutes later, I realized that the pain was increasing and that it was moving from my lower back toward my side, and my pains didn't really move like that. And so I went upstairs and I woke my parents up, and I said, Mom, Dad, I'm having this really weird pain. It's starting to hurt really bad. I don't know what to do. My mom is a nurse, and so she knew what to do. She got on WebMD real fast. And she started Googling and started looking on there, what in the world's going on. She started feeding me ibuprofen, but nothing was helping. And I come to this place where I am in the fetal position in their bedroom, on their bedroom floor, because it hurts so bad. My dad eventually takes me to the ER. Come to find out, I was passing a kidney stone freshman year of high school. So that's all fun and dandy. And then they have you come back, or they have me come back to take a few scans, I guess. I don't know why they did this. But they take some scans, and sure enough, as I'm walking out the door, they say, Collin, you do indeed have more kidney stones in your kidney. So just so you know, there's a chance they might break loose and come out someday, and you might have to go through this again. Have a good day. Right? So now I live my life, and every once in a while, there's this thought that jumps back in. It's like, you have kidney stones. It's like, oh, and my heart kind of sinks. And I live in the truth that it very well may happen again at some time in my life. Thank you, doctors, for letting me know. And I share all that this morning because what I want to paint a picture of is I really do truly believe we all kind of could potentially have something like that. You know, it could be a medical ailment like that. It could be, a business thing, a job thing. It could be a family thing. But sometimes it creeps into our minds and our hearts sink a little bit. And we become uncomfortable, or we experience real fear, real worry, real anxiety. And a lot of times it's connected to what's unknown, what's uncontrollable. And those things kind of creep into our life and try and take root and determine how we feel, how we act, our blood pressure and things like that. And I really do think that as humans, that's just something that happens from time to time, or something that we run into, is this truth that there are real worries and fears and anxieties that we carry with us. The reason I'm building this idea is because we're in this series called 24/6, and we've been taking a look at how we can find rest and peace and the way God has designed us and the way God has established our lives and how we're supposed to live, or how he's created us to live. So the question I want to ask this morning is, in the midst of the worries, the fears, and anxieties that are going to creep into our life from time to time, or maybe for some of us that just never seem to go away, how is it possible to find rest, to find silence within ourselves when all those things keep creeping back in and keep hanging out? So what I want to do, I want to look at a psalm. It's specifically Psalm 62, and it's written by a guy named David. David, much like Ed Sheeran today, is the best lyricist of his time. And he wrote a lot of our psalms that we have in our Bible. And sometimes in his psalms, much like songs in our culture today, you can hear his words and listen to what it is that he's writing. And you can connect what he might be going through in life to his song, and vice versa. You can connect his song and when he wrote it to what he's potentially going through. Some of our psalms help us out in the Bible, and they very clearly say David was going through this or encountering this when he wrote this. But the one we're going to look at today, it's Psalm 62, isn't as clear with us. But we do get a little bit of insight into what David is encountering, or what he's currently wrestling with, or what he's facing when he writes this psalm. So check this out. Psalm 62, verses 3 and 4. This is what David writes. How long will all of you attack a man to batter him? Like a leaning wall, a tottering fence. They only plan to thrust him down from his high position. They take pleasure in falsehood. They bless with their mouths, but inwardly they curse. So David paints this picture of us of seemingly some people are trying to get after him or after his life or after something about him. And there's a very good chance David writes this psalm in the setting of where we find him in 2 Samuel chapter 15. What's happening in 2 Samuel chapter 15 is David is king. He's king over the people. He's ruler, large and in charge. But he has this son named Absalom. And Absalom becomes greedy and desires the throne, desires the power and the influence that David has. So over the course of about 4 years, Absalom stands at the gate and he begins almost recruiting people for his team. People are coming to settle different affairs and different things like that, coming to David, and Absalom is stopping them and he's saying, if I was in charge, it would be so much better. Or this is what I would do. Oh, if only I had the power, and different things like that. And what he's doing is he's pulling people away from David, their loyalty from David, and he's hoping to gain it from all the people because he wants to be in control. So after about 4 years, he's done a pretty decent job, and David catches wind that Absalom, not his only son, but his third son, is coming for him. So David does what's pretty wise. He gets out of there. So he runs from the city, and he takes with him any of the people and all the people who are still loyal to David, and they all flee with him. So David is being pushed out of his throne, pushed out of his city, of his home. And even on top of that, we read that Absalom is out to murder his father so he can officially take the throne and be in command. So David's life is at risk. Everything he knew and all the people he thought were loyal to him are no longer loyal to him, and he is on the run from this place. So we get this idea that there's a good chance David is experiencing a little bit of worry, a little bit of fear, a little bit of confusion. What in the world's going on? And then it's that setting that we believe, because of verses 3 and 4 in here, that he probably wrote this psalm, Psalm 62. So imagine yourself with David in that moment. There's people that are chasing after him, trying to kill him, that are trying to overcome all the people that fled with him and are still loyal to him. And he writes these words. If you imagine yourself in that situation, or imagine me in that situation, it's a bunch of SOS letters, yet crying out, why is this going on? Help me, help me, help me, save me, things like that, right? So keep that in mind, what you would write if you were in David's circumstances. But this is what David writes, Psalm 62, back in verse 1. For God alone, my soul waits in silence. From him comes my salvation. He alone is my rock and my salvation. My fortress, I shall not be greatly shaken, or I shall not be shaken greatly. We get the sense in this psalm, in these first few verses from David, despite the situation he finds himself in, that he has a way and a means to find silence, and he uses that word silence as if his soul within him is able to find peace and calm in the midst of what he's going through. And he very assuredly says that my soul waits in silence, for God alone comes my salvation. And then he uses these images of being his rock, his salvation, and his fortress. And he begins to paint the picture for us of why he can be so confident and so calm writing these things despite what he's going through. So then he, in verses 3 and 4, writes what we read earlier about the people who were chasing after him. And then in verses 5 through 7, he repeats himself in many ways from verses 1 and 2. He uses many of the same words and pretty much the same theme, but he twists it just a little bit. Check this out. Verse 5, for God alone, O my soul, wait in silence. For my hope is from him. He only is my rock and my salvation, my fortress, I shall not be shaken. On God rests my salvation and my glory, my mighty rock, my refuge is God. He changes a little bit. In the first few verses, it's a proclamation of this is who my God is, and I will not be shaken. I will not be greatly shaken because of who my God is. And then he recaps who's chasing after him, and it is as if in verses 5 through 7, he begins to talk to himself in his own personal soul to remind himself of what is true about God and about his current circumstances. And I think the lesson we pull from that and what we see in David's example here is that there's times when we have to choose to remind ourselves of what is true and what is good and what is foundational in our faith. We have to remind ourselves of these things instead of letting our current circumstance or situation define who we're going to be or how we're going to feel in any given moment. I think David probably wrestles a little bit with his soul becoming uneasy again when he writes verses 3 and 4, but then he says, "Oh, my soul, wait in silence, because this is who my God is." David's thinking back to the work that he knows God has done for his people in delivering them from Egypt, and he has total confidence that God cannot be shaken. He has total confidence that God cannot be shaken, and I truly believe that's why he writes the words that he writes. That's why he uses the images that he uses, because he's heard the testimonies of what God has done. He's met God and has a relationship with him, and he is confident because of the unchanging character of God that he will not be shaken despite what David is going through. And we get the picture here that I truly believe David finds his silence in his soul, the calm, the peace, the rest, because he knows he belongs to God and that God will not be moved by his circumstance and his situation. And I think that's all fine and good, but I think we really have to ask the question then, David's life was on the line. For many of us, our lives aren't on the line today. I hope. That's my hope for you, is that nobody's going to come cold blood get you today. But we do, I think, all have that sense that there are certain things that are going to creep into our lives that we are helpless over, that we are helpless to control, that we can't understand, and we don't know what to do about. And I think a lot of those emotions and a lot of those feelings are true and real and very similar to where David's at. But how can we be so sure as David? How can we be so certain that God can do the same work in our life to bring the same peace and be so confident as David was in this moment? How can we know that God cares to work in the struggles that we're going to face today, this week? How do we know God will deliver us and provide for us in those moments of worry and fear and anxiety? I believe we can truly believe that. I believe we can hold on to hope and confidence in a God who cannot be shaken because of the reason we gather here every single weekend, because of the reason that we're here together to celebrate what God has done for us. The good news of Christianity, the good news of this book, the good news that we celebrate together is that Jesus gave up everything he had in heaven to come down to this earth and take on a body like ours so that he could live as an example for us and so that he could give himself as a sacrifice for the sins and the mistakes and the pain that we had caused ourselves and others. That's the good news of Christianity, is that God made a way for us to know him and enjoy him again by taking the penalty of our sins upon himself, which is an amazing, beautiful truth. And because that's true, because that's what we believe in, that's what we hold on to, because Jesus has closed this gap between us and God, he has washed away our sin and our guilt, we can have confidence in any given moment that no matter what it is that we're facing, because of what God has done for us, he's going to continue to provide and protect and to care for us today. We can be so confident, and Paul says it like this in Romans 8, that if God, who gave his only son, was willing to sacrifice everything to him for the sake of us knowing his love, for the sake of us finding freedom from our destruction and life in him again, if God was willing to do that, would he not also be willing to give us everything we would ever need while we're here, to take care of us in any given moment, to provide peace when it seems like the storms of life are going to overtake us? Would a God who gave us everything, including freedom from sin and death, not also be able or willing to care for us for the worries and fears and anxieties in life? I truly believe he will, and I truly believe he does because of what he's proven on the cross of Jesus and by walking out of that grave on the third day. And it's because of the death and resurrection of Jesus that we have a confident hope. We have a God who is a rock. We have a God who cannot be shaken. We have confidence that he will always take care of us. And I believe when we personalize that, kind of like David's doing here in this Psalm with God, we internalize that and we become a people and we begin to believe that God really has done that work on our behalf. We're going to begin running into moments where fear wants to overcome us, where worry wants to overcome us, and we're going to begin to side with David by crying out to God and trusting as him as our salvation and our rock and our refuge, because we know God's already taken care of the bigger things in life. He's already taken care of our relationship with him and provided a way for us to enjoy him again. And it's when we come to that place, we'll begin to take David's advice here and begin to proclaim it with him. This is what he says in verse 8. Trust in him at all times, O people. Pour out your heart before him. God is a refuge for us. I don't know if there's people here with him that he's like writing to and they're singing this or saying this out together, or if it's meant for people later on. But the message to me is very clear that David is experiencing a peace and a calm when he shouldn't be. And he wants so badly for other people to also experience what it is that he's experiencing in his relationship and his knowledge of who God is. So he cries out and says, trust in him at all times, O people. Pour out your heart before him. God is a refuge for us. I think David wants us and wants the people there to trust only in God. And I believe that the only part, trusting only in God, is so crucial because David thought it was so crucial. Little nerdy moment here for you. He uses this word as he writes this psalm that means only or alone. He uses it 6 times and 4 times in correlation, direct correlation with God in this psalm. And when he uses the word, he puts it at the beginning of the line. Hebrew's really weird. So he puts it at the beginning of the line, and so he does so to emphasize that point, to emphasize that message, that it is only in God that I can find this rest. It is only in God that I can have confidence like this. It is only in God that I am not overcome with despair and worry. And so I think the message for us is very clear. There is only one place to hope. There's only one place to find rest, find freedom from those things that we face in life, and it is only in a God who cannot be shaken. And what I think is really neat, David, he goes from here, and he gives 2 examples. He gives one example of who not to trust in. These are the things and the people to not trust in, and then he gives an example of who we do trust in. And this is all in verses 9 through 12. The first one is who not to trust in. He says, those of low estate are but a breath. Those of high estate are a delusion. In the balances they go up, they are together lighter than a breath. Put no trust in extortion. Set no vain hopes on robbery. And if riches increase, set not your heart on them. I think he's being very pointed with this passage. It seems like he's calling out the people who are after his life. The people who are running after the riches and the fame and the power and the extortion, and they're coming after his life because of those things. But what I think is really unique is in light of that, he uses this word to define them and the threat here as a breath. He uses the word breath, and the idea of that is that we see these vapors maybe in the air or like smoke in the air, and you can like reach out and try to touch it, but whenever you do and you try to grasp the vapor, there's like nothing there and you can't actually feel anything or grab anything. That's the idea behind this word breath. And what he's saying is, I have these threats in my life. I have these people running after me to kill me, but to me and where he's at in this psalm, they're only a breath. They're fading away. They're gonna go away. They're here for a moment, but they're vanishing soon. And David gives us an incredible picture of part of the reason he finds so much peace and calm in who God is because in comparison to who God is, these threats and these trials and these things he's dealing with, they're just gonna be here for a moment. And I think that's good news for us this morning, that the things that we run into and that we face are just here for a moment. But look at what he trusts in. Instead of being in vain or being in despair because of those things, he says this in verse 11 and 12. He ends his psalm with a little, I think, proverbial wisdom. But he says, once God has spoken, twice I have heard this, that power belongs to God, and that you, O Lord, belongs steadfast love. For you will render to a man according to his work. David doesn't trust or worry too much about the vapors that are passing in life, but he trusts completely and confidently in the power of God, in the love of God, and in the justice of God. And I think the picture we get here of David in these last couple verses is his understanding that he doesn't have to try and strive after a way or scheme after a way to escape some of what life's trying to throw at him, because he totally and completely is convinced that God is at work on his behalf. Because of what God has done in the past, he trusts completely that God's going to take care of him in this moment. So he can trust in God's ability, God's power. He can trust in God's love that it will never fail. And he can trust in the justice that he doesn't have to make up for what Absalom is running after and trying to do to him. He doesn't have to try and get payback or anything like that because he knows his God is in control. He knows his God is in control. So I think the drive for us then, as we wrestle with the good news of Jesus and the difference Jesus makes in our life, and specifically the confidence we can have when things in life begin to creep back in. And what I believe is truly the enemy, the devil, trying to say, be worried, be anxious, be fearful. We can remind ourselves, and we can begin to take the advice of David from this psalm in verse 8 and begin to pour out our hearts to him. Begin to pour out our hearts to God. And what I think is really unique about that is David understands. He understands that it's when those things creep back in, when those things run into you again, or you run into them, that is in the exact moment that turning to God and pouring out your heart to him is where you will begin to again remind yourself of who God is, of what he has done, and the work that he will continue to do despite the situations we find ourselves in life. So we want to pour out our hearts to him. And I want to tell you this morning, we can be confident in doing so. We can be confident that God is going to provide and protect because of what he's done on the cross. And so consider with me this morning what it is that continues to come at you, continues to cause you these feelings and these emotions, continues to keep you from finding the peace in life and the rest in life that I completely believe God has in store for you, because that's what he has accomplished for us in taking on the burden of all that we face, of our sin and of our death. And he's ready to be strong and mighty and powerful in our lives. And so we have to begin by simply asking him to be so and pouring our hearts out to him. We're hopeless without him because our lives are going to continue to shift and shake. But our God cannot be shaken, and he never will be. I think God has a vision too for UCC, for his children in Manhattan, to be this people who take this truth to heart, who understand because of the gospel of Jesus, God truly cannot be shaken, and he will always work for the better of our behalf, on our behalf. Take that truth to heart, and all of a sudden there's this people in Manhattan who runs into trials in life, to hard times in life, to confusion in life. And they don't react the same. We don't react the same as everybody else in the world. Because out of nowhere, because of the truths that we're applying to our lives, we begin to be confident in the peace that we can find in who God is. And we become this people in Manhattan that aren't shaken by the world and aren't dragged down by the world. And we begin to be a living testimony to the power and the greatness of our God in our lives. I believe that's God's vision and God's heart for us together. And we begin that right now this morning. We begin to be a place of peace, of strength, and of assurance this morning by taking that step to pour out our hearts to God and trust him with everything that we are and everything that we have. Whenever I have thoughts of the kidney stone popping back into my head, it's comical but not comical. The first thing that comes to mind, the first thing I do is honestly to pray, because I know it's out of my control, and I know it's out of my knowledge as to if or when it will ever happen again. And I think what my hope would be, and I think what God's hope would be, is that when all of us run into moments like that, that would be our first reaction, is to say, God, I really can't control this. I really don't know the outcome of this, but I do know that I can trust you to be strong and unmovable in this. I ask that in this time of invitation that you would begin to make that commitment to pour out your heart to him. And if you would like somebody to join you with that, we do always have a prayer team in the back right corner during this last song. Jesus, thank you. Thank you for the work that you've done on our behalf. Thank you for the difference that you make in the grand scheme of eternity for each of us. God, I ask for your help that we could all begin to see eternally and not be bogged down or held back by the things that we run into in this life. God, I know we won't be perfect in it, and I know we won't always completely escape it, but you will always be strong and mighty. So teach us this morning together to trust in you more and to find peace in you and to find silence in you. We love you, and we're so grateful for your word and how you work through David's life. I ask that you would work through ours, God, to be a light in this community, to be a light to this dark world, that you would get all the glory and praise for the work you've done and will do in our lives. We love you, Lord, and it's all in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.